Did you have a place you were thinking about sitting? Or, I was going to like, yeah, no. You said, okay.
If I can, oh, it's not on. Nope. If I could get you to,
If you can sit back down and get started again.
I get to,
Right now. I get to brag on our presenter a little bit. This is Andre Koen at our parent conference last year in Brainerd. We saw him, so we wanted him right away to come to talk to our staff. Andre Koen is an energetic presenter, a powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. His educational influence spans the North American continent. Andre integrates his abilities as an improvisational comedian, large group facilitator, keynote speaker, and classroom teacher to captivate and educate his audience. There are many words that define him: educator, student, improvisational comedian, speaker, activist, facilitator, coach, mentee, mentor, leader, team member, community organizer, diversity trainer, motivator, friend, and son. The most representative, however, is Andre the Enkindled Spirit. Please welcome Mr. Andre Koen, President and founder of AM Variety.
So at some point I'll put the microphone down because it's kind of weird talking. I don't know if anybody, but some of you guys do karaoke, so I know you're really comfortable with microphones here. But me, not so much. So I do want to make sure that everyone can hear me, and so at some point I will set the microphone down and try to project to make sure that folks can hear me. I want to say it is an honor to be here for a number of reasons. The most important of reasons is the fact that this is a full circle for me. Because when I was a small child, well, first of all, let's talk about my parents, right? So my parents fell in love as sophomores in college. They had known each other since they were in elementary school, but something about that sophomore year, the magic just happened. And so, as a result of that magic, I am here. Right? And so my parents got married at a young age, and I don't know if folks remember or know folks who are sophomores in college, they don't make a lot of money. And so getting married is probably not like the best thing that they could choose to do. But obviously, there was a blessing that came out of that, right? But consequently, not having finished any educational degrees, not having an associate, not having a 4-year degree, put them in a particular financial line. That love would carry them through. But how many people know that love sometimes is not enough, right? And so they fell into a segment of society that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know that we were in a segment of society. And so my parents, so I'm on the board of ACAP, which is an Anoka County Community Action Program. And when I was first introduced to that program, I was like, wow, they're doing great stuff for people in poverty and energy assistance and housing and all sorts of stuff. This is just really great stuff. And then they started talking about this program called Head Start. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Poor kids can learn how to read, and poor kids can blah 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 blah, right? So I'm sitting on top of this pedestal using these kinds of words, and I know they're offensive words, right? But this is what was going on in my head because this is what I was sold. And then so I got all excited, and so I called my mom and said, "Mom, I'm on this board, and we're doing this program. We monitor this program called Head Start. And this is what they do, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going on, I'm all excited. And then she starts laughing. I was like, Mom, why are you laughing? And she said, boy, you were in Head Start. I was like, we were that poor? Because the thing that alarmed me, the thing that surprised me about that, was that when I got up to in the morning, and my mother, fixed my cereal and picked out my afro and put Vaseline on my face. When she did that, there was this yellow thing that was coming to pick me up. And what did I call it as a child? I called it a school bus. And where were they taking me? To school. And who was the person that was going to instruct me? My teacher. I didn't know that I was in a special program designed to raise me up to my peers. What I knew was that there was an opportunity for learning, that there were people there who cared about me, and that they cared enough about me to like me, and they didn't even know me. Many of the children that we're working with, they may not have a lot of money, but you don't make them poor. You see, one of the things that we talked about in my family, it was very obvious that we, sort of obvious, it's more obvious now than it was then, that we didn't have a lot of money because we would go to, at that point, you could get a month's worth or a school set of clothes from the place called the Goodwill for $10. You can get a whole season worth of, now you can really get a sweater at Goodwill. Anyway, but the interesting thing was we didn't have a lot of money, but my mother would come in, she'd get those things from the thrift store, she'd wash them, she'd press them, she'd iron them, she'd polish them, she'd clean them, and then we wore them as if they were new. Because although we didn't have a lot of money, we were never poor. Poverty is something that you have in your heart. And one of the things that we haven't told the truth about, because we talk about poor people. Have you been to symposiums and you listen to TV and they talk about poor people? Have you ever heard someone talk about poor people? Or they talk about poverty? Does anyone, raise your hand if you've heard somebody talk about poor people and poverty? What they don't do is they don't tell the truth. And the truth is that people aren't poor. People are in an inequity system. There's a system that they're operating with. that doesn't allow them to reach their full potential. And so we'll talk about some of those things. And so I'm so happy that there were people like you in Dayton, Ohio, who monitored the buses, who brought me the snacks, who walked me through my ABCs. So if there's ever any doubt that what you do works, or you're feeling, oh my goodness, this is not getting through to this kid, I want you to think of me. Because the investment that you're making is changing the world. I've had the opportunity and been blessed to speak throughout the United States, to speak in other countries, all because Mrs. White invested her time and her energy in me. And you never know which of your students will be the next president, the next governor, the next good dad in their family. And so I'm going to say thank you in advance for the future that you're creating in the young people you have today. So give yourselves a hand. That was weak. That was weak. Give yourself a bigger hand. All right, so now let's get to the good stuff. So one of the things I like to do before I jump all the way into the presentation is get a temperature of the room. And there's a particular way that I like to get that temperature of the room. And so I'm going to ask you to take a risk with me. All right? Take a risk with me. And so this is typically how I get the temperature of the room. I simply ask a question, and then that lets me know how the room is. And so I was a high school teacher, and I taught middle school. I taught high school and middle school for 7 years simultaneously with no lunch breaks. And so in the morning I'd have my high schoolers, in the afternoon I'd have my middle schoolers. I worked at a charter school where year-round, it was really a lot of grunt work and hard work. But these are some, I'm going to share some things with you today that I've learned from my students. And so this is one of those things. And what I learned was a tool that, we had, at that time we had basic standards tests. Does anyone remember that time in history, right? So now I guess it's a common core, and I'm not sure the core of what, but at any rate. So I would, Monday through Thursday, I would teach my curriculum. And every Friday, we would have a pop quiz. Now, the most fascinating thing about that was every Friday, I had students that were surprised. So I'm going to give you a pop quiz. But I was a fair and just teacher, because what do you think I did before I gave the pop quiz? I taught the information, right? I gave them the curriculum. So I am going to give you the curriculum for the pop quiz I'm going to ask you, all right? Or that I'm going to give you. And here is the answer to the pop quiz. Fantastic! Terrific! Great! All day long! Huh. That's the answer. So please stand if you're able. Please stand if you're able. So the answer goes like this. Fantastic. Terrific. Great. All day long. Now remember, safety first, all right? The young lady in the front right here, she was like, yeah! I'm like, whoa, sister. Bring it down, bring it down. All right? So let's practice one more time. The answer is fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. All right, very good, very good. So you know the answer, so now I will give the question. How do you feel?
Fantastic, terrific,
very good. And it is very clear that there are Lutherans in the room. Very clear. I happen to be evangelical, and we are just like Lutherans, except that all the excitement that we have, Lutherans keep bottled up. And so what I want you to do is I want you to rip the cap off the sucker and tell me, how do you feel?
Fantastic! Terrific! Great! All day long! Woo!
Good job, good job. You may be seated. You may be seated. So how many people felt goofy doing that particular thing? Raise your hand if you felt a little bit goofy, weird, silly, right? Yeah. I want you to think about the parents that we work with. How often have we asked them to do things that they find goofy or silly? I'm currently working with a program called FRED, Fathers Read Every Day. Did you know that there is a population of men who do not know how to, they know how to read, but they do not know how to read to their children? Or ask them to do something goofy. There's another program that a friend of mine runs with the Department of Corrections. And one of the things that they do is they coach men on how to read to their children, and they record those on CD for their children, and then they send the CD and the book home to their children so that they at least have that connection. So my daughter is 14 months. Her name is Phoebe Inez Koen. We refer to her as Pika. Shoot. Just the most darling little creature. But I have to say that I'm really concerned about this world because nobody checked us off to take this little baby home. There was no test. There was no certification process. I mean, I got a license for my dog, but not for my daughter. And one of the things that they told me, they said, Dad, this is important for you to do. And I was like, this is silly and goofy. They said, lay naked from the chest up with your daughter on your stomach. I was like, that's kind of weird. But why did they suggest that I do that weird thing? Because she needs to bond with me as much as she bonds with her mother, right? And so sometimes when we send assignments home, or we interact with parents, or we invite them to these things, they see that those things they may seem goofy or weird at first until you know what? Why? The purpose. And so, now that she's bigger, we've moved to making sure my shirt is on, because that is just getting weird, It's just, and we're real careful with the bathtub pictures, right? They're very censored, because a coach got in trouble for that, didn't they, or something? Yeah. So, they try to, it's legalistic, and plus one of the things that I'm working on, and this is my wife gets mad at me when I say this, but it's true. I don't think that I have been a good father if my daughter ends up a dancer on a pole. So that's my ultimate goal. So she won't be a dancer on a pole. Not that, for some people that's a good profession, it's just, I'm not, I'm not, I will have not, I will have missed the mark. Right. So it's important for us to realize that uncomfortableness, that goofiness that we feel, because oftentimes our families feel very, they feel similar, right? They feel very similar. So what I'd like you to do is, if you can open up your handbook, your handout for today, and you will see that there are 5 gray circles. Does everyone have a handout?
All right, so there are 5 gray circles. And what I'd like for you to do with those circles, do you need one? Is in each of those circles, I'd like for you to put one thing that you value or one thing that is important to you in each one of those circles. All right? So there are 5 circles, so you'll end up with 5 values or 5 things that are important to you. And it can be things like, a place like Bemidji or Belize. It could be a thing like a motorcycle or a home. It could be a person like a significant other or a child. It could be a concept like freedom or justice. So one thing that you value in each one of those gray circles. One thing that you value or that is important to you. Little management by walking around. All right, it looks like most people have 4, if not all 5. So we'll move to step 2. What I'd like for you to do is, I'd like for you to find 2 people for each one of your things that you wrote down that you value or that is important to you, which means you'll have a total of how many individuals? So you should have a minimum of 10 individuals, 2 for each one of the things that you value, all right? And once you find those individuals that either agree with or share the same thing that you have, meaning that they say, oh, that's a really good idea, or I share that same thing or a similar thing, I want them to put their initials next to the thing that they value, all right? Are people clear about that? Don't start yet. I see some people taking it. Jumping the gun. I want to make sure everybody has the same amount of time. All right? Any questions before we begin? You have 90 seconds to do this starting now. 60 seconds, 60 seconds.
Nobody got that.
No, that's fine. It will work out. It'll work out. Or similar things. Or agree with them. So, try to talk to
Four, three, two, one. Take over.
All right, was there anyone that was able to get 10 people to sign on their paper? All together. Yep, all together. All right, great. Let's give those folks a hand. As you were walking around the room, were there things that you saw in other people's papers and you were like, wow, why didn't I think about that? I should have wrote that down myself. What were some of those things that you saw in someone else's paper that you thought you should have wrote down? Yes, ma'am. Simplicity. Wow. Yeah. That's what my grandfather would call a dime word, right? Simplicity. Yes, ma'am. Calmness. You saw that on someone else's paper and said, you know what? I value that. Yes, ma'am. Money. Right? Yeah. Saw that on someone else's paper and said, I should have wrote that down. Right? Yes. Faith. Right? So that was something that you saw. All right. Oh, great. All right. All right, I got it from here. Thank you. Let's give it up for tech folks. So, I would imagine that there were also things that were either difficult for people to sign on, or they actually did not get anyone to sign on. Was that the case? Did people have trouble with some things, or actually weren't able to find anybody to sign on one of those things? Okay, and what were some of those things that people weren't able to find, or it was difficult? Yes, ma'am. Stability. Please raise your hand if you value stability, even if it wasn't written on your paper. Okay, cool. What was another? Yes, sir. Empathy. Please raise your hand if you value empathy, even if it wasn't written on your paper. All right? Yes, sir. Experiences. If having experiences, enjoying experiences is important, even if you didn't write it on your paper, please raise your hand. All right? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just raising my hand.
Oh, okay.
Opportunities.
Oh, opportunities. If opportunities are important, raise your hand. All right? I have a hand in the back, and then I'll get you in the blue sweatshirt. Yes, ma'am. Simplicity is something that you value. Please raise your hand, even if you didn't write it down. Yes, ma'am. No, you don't put somebody. She said toilet, but people are too embarrassed to say it. I value a toilet. Let me just say that. Yes, ma'am. Rest and renewal. Please raise your hand if you value those things. All right. So we're in a session titled diversity training, right? Or this concept of diversity training. Why would I start our session off with an activity like this? Just to see where everyone is, yes? So it shows differences, all right? And it talks about, it deals with our similarities. And what I would submit to you is that we are more alike than we are different. and that the differences that we think we see are optical illusions. Optical illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relationships. Optical illusion. Because I find it really interesting. I've known friends of friends who have had family members that were really, opinionated about other groups of people. And then when one of those groups of people falls in love with a person from another group and they have a baby, they still might not like that group, but they sure enough like that baby. Optical illusion. I find it interesting that you were able to find similarities and make connections with people around, what did I ask you to write down? Your values. Who gives you or who introduces you to your values? Your parents, your family, the people who raised you. And so how is it possible that we all don't have the same parents in an ethereal kind of human way? We do, right? I mean, but many of our parents didn't know each other, but they came up with similar values, and we were able to make connections with people that we don't necessarily know from growing up, but we're able to make those connections around values. How is that possible? How is that possible? So these are human traits of compassion. What else? And understanding. These are things that are human. Oh! So one of the things that was really tricky in the birth of my daughter, my wife is a Assiniboine, which is a native tribe that dips down into Montana from Canada, and so she's native, and I'm African American, which means I'm a mixture of a whole lot of stuff, most of which I don't know, but I'm a good mix. And so we were sitting in the hospital room, and they were asking us to determine the race of our child. So what would she be? And so I looked at all of the options, and I said, Cuban. Because I'm thinking strategically, like, what would be the most helpful and beneficial to her in the future, right? The Latina population is really growing in the United States. That would be really handy for her to be Cuban. My wife looked at me. She was like, "What are you talking about? Cuban?" She's like, "I'm native and you're black. She's got to be a Blendian." Don't you tell that joke. You cannot tell that joke, right? So we're going through this thing, and we didn't come to a conclusion. But then I started thinking about my own birth, and my parents had me, and we're in the my mom is in the stirrups, and these are stories that my parents told me because I don't remember. Right? I was there, but I don't remember. So my mom is, she's in the stirrups, and my dad's trying to coach her. All right, honey. She's like, shut up, leave me alone. You got me into this, and all this kind of stuff. So it's all this drama in the waiting room, and so the doctor, receives me, and they had a funny thing that they would do, back in the 70s, and they would slap the baby. And so the doctor slapped me, and I did what any self-respecting human being would do, and that is slap the doctor back. That's a whole Richard Pryor joke, and the only one I can tell. All right. So the doctor hands me to the nurse, and the nurse puts me on the scale. She takes all my vitals, how long I am, how much I weigh, and then she gets to the part of the her checklist that changes my life. And so she goes, she does all the vitals, and she goes to this section called race. And in the 70s, there were three options: black, white, or other. So she looks at my parents, and she looks at me, and she looks at her list, and she looks at my parents, she looks at her list, she looks at me, and then she makes her decision. And what decision do you think she makes? Black. But here's the thing that I pondered. What if she had selected something different? How might my life have changed? But more importantly came this question. Before she made a decision, what was I? What were you? What are you? Who have you forgotten to be? So before she made that decision, I was human, but America made me black. America made me white. One of the saddest things is to particularly when I talk to my white brothers and sisters, I ask, sometimes, we get in conversations and I'll hear white people say, I'm Caucasian. Has anyone ever heard a white person say that I'm Caucasian, right? Have you ever asked the person that said that they were Caucasian, where is that? Yes, I'm Caucasian. Okay, that's great. Where is that? And typically, what do people say when you ask them where Caucasia is? I don't know. Right. The interesting thing is that Caucasian comes from it means people from the Caucasus Mountains. And the Caucasus Mountains are in Turkey and in Asia. So very far west, far east European. So that's we'll talk more about that in just a bit. All right. So one of the things that I also think is interesting is, so what did I ask you to do with these circles? I asked you to write down what? 5 things that you value. Now, typically what happens when I ask people to do this is that they either have their top 5 on the top of their head and they go bam, and they write down number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Other folks say, you know what, I have a lot more things that I value, and I'm going to randomly pick from those and write those things down. And then there's the third category of people who do both, right? So they take a couple of things that they really value and then just some random things and they toss those things on the paper. I would imagine that you participated in one of those 3 scenarios. Is that true? Is that safe to say? All right, cool. So I've done this activity a number of times, and one of the things that really intrigues me is not so much what people write down, but what they don't write down. And so I have a hypothesis that I'd like to test out with you to see if it holds true. And this is my hypothesis. I'll ask the questions, and then we'll see if it fits my hypothesis. So one of the questions that I'd like to ask around what you didn't write down is, did anyone write down anything about their ethnicity or their racial background? Like specifically how it would show up on an HR form. Please raise your hand if you wrote something about your ethnicity or okay, so no one raised their hand or even nodded that they wrote anything about their ethnicity. All right. Did anyone write anything down about their gender expression, or gender identity, as you would on an HR form? Did anyone write those? So nobody put their gender. Okay.
Well, I kind of wrote down time and faith.
Okay, so time and faith to be a better woman. So, okay, all right. So I can take that. I won't argue with you on that. All right. So no, that's good. That's good. So we have one person who wrote anything about that. All right. Now, this next question, I want you to jump up and down, wave your hands in the air like you don't care, if you can say yes to this. Did anyone write down anything pertaining to their social economic status, your tax bracket?
I wrote opportunity.
She wrote opportunities. Is that the same as your tax bracket? No? Okay. If it kind of works for you, go for it. I'm not going to fight you on it. It's good. Right? You have financial independence. Okay. Great. Yes. You wrote money. Okay. Why is it that, so we have a couple of people who wrote things, but the majority of us did not write anything about our social economic status. The majority of us did not write anything about our gender, and the majority of us did not talk about or deal with our race or ethnicity. And why is that? Why do you think that we didn't write those things down for the majority of us? Because what? Because it doesn't matter? Because what? It's not something in the forefront of your mind? Yes.
It doesn't define me.
It doesn't define you.
I mean, as far as, yeah, people might say, oh yeah, she's this middle class white woman. But as far as what I do for the world, what the world does for me, how God sees me, that is not important.
So on the scales of, now what I will say, I'll give this as a caveat. What I'm not suggesting is that your racial identity or your gender identity or your social economic status is not important. But what I would say, along with you, is that they are not as important as the things that we value. Now, here's the funny thing. We have a set of values that are very common among all of us, that we're able to share and find out about these things. But there are powers in the world that don't want us to recognize the things that we have in common. They're constantly creating these obstacle illusions. And so, it's important for us to be able to see those things and pierce through them, because they'll keep having us think about things in ways that aren't productive for us. For example, how does President Barack Hussein Obama show up in the world ethnically or racially? What would most people say when they see President Barack Hussein Obama? They will say that he's a black man or an African American man. Is that the truth or the totality of his existence? No, it's not, right? So his mother was a white woman from Kansas. His dad was a black man from Kenya. They got together and they Obama'd. And so he shows up as an African-American man or a black man, which also means that he could show up as a biracial man, which also means that he could make the declaration and show up as a white man. As much as he is black, he is also white. Can you imagine President Obama walking around saying, I am a white man? It's hard enough for some people to believe he was born. But that's a whole nother conversation. So the world tries to put us in boxes. It tries to trap us in. It tries to define us. And one of the things that we have the opportunity to do with the families and the young people that we serve is give them education that transcends all of those things. One of my favorite shows growing up was a show called The Reading Rainbow. I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can do it. Right. So anybody remember that stuff, right? Yeah, it's just so motivational because books can take us places. My grandfather, and actually wasn't my grandfather, he was my great-grandfather, lived with us. And he was born in 1890. And was a really old dude, right? I mean, this dude was like old. But one of the things that he did, he had a third-grade education. He worked hard. He was able to, the highest status he was able to achieve in his career was an elevator operator for the city. So his job was he was the guy that pushed the buttons in the elevators. Darn robots, right? So that was his job. That highest station. But he did something that I thought was very interesting and very unique. Although he only had a third grade education, he believed that education was important, so he bought these encyclopedias. And so I found a set of his encyclopedias from the early 1900s. He had these encyclopedias. And the words that they would use to describe groups of people was absolutely fascinating. But given the context and when these books were written, they could say anything about anybody because what? Most people couldn't read. And so one of the things that I've learned, buying houses and buying cars, is that they will hide everything in writing. Because most people don't read their Facebook consent to all your pictures when you sign up for the update. Anybody ever read those updates? No, I just want my free Facebook. Whatever you say, you can have it on it, right? So reading is empowering, and that's what we do for our families. We're not letting them or their children get boxed into these small little things. One of the things that I always ask people who consider themselves to be advocates is so there's this thing out there, Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and people blah, blah, blah. The thing that I want and I can't wait to see is that, let me back up. So I used to be the pull up your pants police, right? So I'm writing tickets all the time because kids have their pants hanging down, and even adults, I'd be like, sir, just a little bit, and so yeah, that was one of the things that I would, and don't you know that took up a lot of my time, telling people to pull up the pants, right? Took up a lot of my time until I figured out something. I don't need to be the pull up your pants police if I'm educating them on when and how they need to pull up the pants. Because in some communities, in some places, in some parts of the city, if you don't look like everybody else, if you don't fit in like everybody else, then you can be under attack. But there are times and places for everything. And so those are the things that we offer. So I want to go to a video clip. And in this video clip, one of the things that you'll hear is anyone familiar with T-Pain? Anyone ever heard of T-Pain? Okay, so she's smiling. She's like, oh yeah! So for the rest of you, T-Pain is a kind of a hip-hop artist type individual who's taken the urban experience and made these sonnets and musical renditions of the urban experience. And he's created such dynamic and uniquely sounding songs with titles such as I'm in love with a stripper. Only to be followed up by his second greatest single, I'm in love with a bartender. Right? So these aren't really great songs. But he uses this thing called auto-tunes to sing his songs. And auto-tunes, kids think that's new, but that's nothing but old Zapp and Roger, more bounce to the ounce, Okay, anyway, so he uses this computer animated voice, and I figured if he can use it for evil, I can certainly use it for good. So in this video, there's some, don't be distracted by the sound or the music, but I want you to pay close attention to the themes that are mentioned in this particular video piece, all right? And I want you to pay attention to the speaker himself. All right, so here we go. All right.
that you rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on. These days of challenge make America what it ought to be. We got some difficult days indeed, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to Mountain Park. And I've looked over, and I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm not worried about anything, I'm not feeling anything. I know as I've seen the glory of God. 1960 students all over the South started sitting in motel. I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the West Indian American creed. Taking the whole nation back to those great grounds of democracy, which were done made by the founding fathers, and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We got some difficult days indeed, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to Mountain Top, and I've looked over, and I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm not worried about anything, I'm not feeling anything. I know as I see the glory of God. 1962, the Negroes in Alpharetta, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And when the men and women straighten their backs up, they're going somewhere because the land ain't alright. Ain't alright, you gotta listen to me. 1963, black people in Birmingham, Alabama, roused the conscience of this nation, brought into being the civil rights movement. Later that year, Augusta tried to tell America about a dream that I had. We got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to Mountain Top, and I've looked over, and I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm not worried. We got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to Mountain Top, and I've looked over, and I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So, what were some of the themes that you heard in that particular piece? What were some of the themes that you heard? What's that? Equality, hope, we as one, faith, dream, promised land, no fear. Who was the speaker? We know that it was an animated voice, but who was the presenter of that particular piece? Okay, so Martin Luther King Jr. is close. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is closer. What's that? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the reason that we have to talk about the Reverend part is if you don't understand that, then you may miss many of the mysteries that he's trying to help us talk about. Some of the universal ways that he's trying to talk about some things, right? So I'll ask this question, and I want you to think about it. It's a rhetorical question, so I want you to think about it. Don't answer it, right? How many speeches of Dr. King do you know by their title? Just think about that. If your answer is one, you have some homework. If you only know one, you have some homework to do. Because the people who are fighting against justice, they've done their homework. Which is why sometimes we're embarrassed to speak because we don't know what we need to know to fight that injustice. And when we don't know what to do, typically what is our fallback position? The fallback position is what? Do nothing. And we'll talk about the hazards of doing nothing. So Dr. King is saying a lot of things in this particular speech, and the thing that I think is most ironic, or the thing that grabs me the most, is that he says something that's very peculiar, particularly given this particular speech. He says, I might not make it with you, but we will make it. The reason that is very peculiar is because this is the last speech that he gives before his assassination. So Sunday night, he delivers this grand speech. And the funny thing is, he's not supposed to be in Memphis. It's not on his docket. It's not on his program. But there were some sanitation workers, both black and white sanitation workers, who said, Dr. King, we need your help. We need your help. And Dr. King was overcoming a cold. He had been on a long stretch of protests and demonstrations and speeches. And some of his closest allies and friends said, Martin, let's not go to Memphis. That's taking us off course. But what Dr. King also understood was that if we have physical freedom, if we have civil liberties, but we don't have financial freedom, we're just as bound as we were before they gave us all of these. It's a tease, so to speak. And so he went down to Memphis to give this wonderful speech. And he gives the speech, and Monday morning he stands on the balcony of at the Lorraine Motel and catches an assassin's bullet in the neck. He said, I might not make it, but we will. Absolutely profound. And this is an excerpt from his mountaintop speech. So now you know two. His mountaintop speech. Now, why would Reverend Dr. King make these allusions or make these connections or make the analogy or use the analogy of this idea of a promised land and mountaintop? What is Dr. King trying to share in this, using these metaphors? What is he trying to share with us? So if we work together, everything can be better. Yes?
He's cueing into the biblical story, Moses, the promised land.
He's cueing into the biblical stories of Moses and the promised land, right? The stories that can be found in the Quran, that can be found in the Torah, that can be found in the Bible, these Abrahamic traditions. He's tying into that because he's staying on brand. It would be inappropriate for him to go off brand, right? If you work for Energizer Ever Ready, it's wrong to have Duracell. Okay. You get the point, right? So he's staying on brand. And so one of the things that I think is interesting, when I was growing up, right around Easter time, there would always be this movie that would come on featuring Charlton Heston. And the name of that movie was The 10 Commandments. Let my people go out of my cold dead hands. No, that's just NRA speech. I get those things. So I imagine, like, if there was a part 2 to the Charlton Heston movie, it would feature the two new guys who are on the scene, Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua and Caleb would take the people into the promised land. And they would have a problem with Moses' people. Because when Moses was the leader, people, they said, when Moses was here, he would, strike a rock and water would come out. When Moses was here, there was a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke, and there was, bread falling from the sky. What's wrong with you guys? You're making us work. And so one day, Joshua and Caleb got, in my imagination, they got fed up with Moses' people. They come to the front of the group, and they said one thing, and then they slammed down the microphone. They stood up and they said, Moses is dead, 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 dead. And then walked off the stage. Now that's very interesting that they would make that declaration and walk off the stage. Because everybody knew that Moses was gone. So why would they state the obvious? Why was that necessary for them to say? Because people kept comparing this new leadership to the old leadership. I'm going to say something, and I don't mean to be offensive, and I hope I don't offend you, but I hope I encourage you to be thoughtful. Dr. King is dead. Gandhi, dead. Mother Teresa, dead. Nelson Mandela, dead. Are any of those individuals coming back to complete their work? If they are, I don't have time to wait. Can their work be completed? So when Dr. King said, I might not make it, but we will, what was he talking about? That the work that gets carried on is done by all of us. What happens if you cut the head off of a snake? Snake is dead. And that's what they thought they would do to the civil rights movement. They said, no, let's cut off the head of the snake. But what happened? They thought it was a snake when it was an octopus. Or a lizard that grows its tail back, right? Now, these next statements are, hopefully they drive you to action, to movement, right? Did you know that there is someone in your life that is waiting for you to be Dr. King? There's someone in your life that is waiting for you to be Mother Teresa, to be more compassionate to them than they can actually be to themselves. There's someone waiting for you to be Gandhi, to squash conflicts that nobody else can squash. They're waiting on you to do it. Well, why do we oftentimes not do it? So let's back up. And have you ever been in a store or out in the community, and you hear something that is blatantly prejudiced, blatantly bigoted, blatantly hateful in someone's speech as they relate to another person? Does anyone raise your hand if you've ever encountered that out in the community where you've heard that, or right? Okay, and typically, what do people do when they hear those? You said they ignore it. They keep it to themselves. They talk to their family or friends about it. It typically looks like we do nothing. Now, here's something interesting that I thought about. And because in looking at my childhood, there's some things that I think are very interesting about my childhood. One of which is I think many people, particularly in the kind of age range I'm in, experience a very similar thing. Has anyone ever been set on fire? Please raise your hand if you've ever been set on fire. Okay, so I have one young man. All right. I've never been set on fire, but I will tell you that if I get caught on fire, I know exactly what to do. Stop, drop, and roll. Now, how is it that I've never been in a fire, never been on fire, But if that were to happen to me, I already know what to do.
They teach us that.
They teach us that.
So if that happens, we don't, let our brain take over the instinct part and we're freaking out. We've got that drilled into us.
We've got it drilled into us.
I stop, I drop, I roll.
I stop, I drop, I roll. Right?
It happened to my son at Boy Scout camp. His shirt went on fire, and somebody there said, stop, drop, and roll, and he saved his skin.
Yes.
Doing that.
Right? So why is it that when we encounter prejudice, bigoted, or racist information, we don't know how to deal with it? Because we haven't practiced it. We haven't been taught. We haven't thought about it. You're at the Thanksgiving table, and you have relatives that come, you haven't seen them in a while, and they tell that joke. And people just go, ugh. Or other people just start, they laugh because, that's Uncle Joe. That's just how Uncle Joe is, right? I was at a grocery store, and actually I was at the dollar store, and I like the dollar store because it makes me feel good about myself. I've been to Macy's, and after I leave Macy's, I have to go to therapy. Because I can afford everything in the dollar store, so it makes me feel good about myself. So they had these movies for a little PlayStation, and so they were like $1. So I got like a whole big bag of them, and I just was, And the thing about the dollar store is it tricks you because it's only $1. You think you can get like 60 of them. I can get 60 things. And anyway, so I get these movies, and I'm doing my stuff. So I'm standing in line, and in front of me is a family. So there's a gentleman, and his pants are kind of hanging low, and he's got his hat cocked to the side, and there's a young lady that's with them, and she's got on house shoes and a silk wrap, and they have the stroller. It's called an umbrella stroller, so it's kind of a little rickety. It's a little rickety or whatever, and the baby is in there, and so they're in front of me, and I'm waiting, patiently, and the store is crowded. It's just full of people because everybody apparently likes the good deals at the dollar store. So it's highly populated. So we're in line, and the young lady pulls out of her basket an apple juice, and she puts it on the counter. While she's doing this, there's something shiny that has caught the young man's attention. So he's off looking at this thing, and she pulls out the apple juice, and she pulls out her EBT card. And is everyone familiar with an EBT card, right? So she pulls out her EBT card, and she's in mid-swipe, and the guy turns around, and he says, "You stupid, boo! How the boo are you going to use it? I got money right here, you stupid, boo, boo!" And just going off, right? And so that store is full of people, right? But everybody in the store does the same thing. We start checking for the prices at the dollar store. How much is this? Wow. Right? And so, everybody's kind of, because it's way uncomfortable to see this thing happening. But I'm kind of a different kind of guy, right? And I'm oftentimes compelled to speak in these situations. And the thing that really got me was as he's belittling her and cussing her out and saying all this stuff, he's getting big. You can just see his body just getting bigger and bigger. And guess how she reacted to all of that verbal assault? She didn't. What might that have been a clue to me about? She's used to it. This is not the first time this has happened. This is something normal. And so, just like everybody else, I'm trying to ignore it too. And then the voice speaks. The voice says, "Say something." I said, "Are you crazy? Do you see this dude?" Right? The voice says, "Say something." And I'm like, I don't know what to say. And by this time, they've completed their stuff, and they're out the door in the store. And I'm like, well, with my opportunity, I guess I blew it, And the voice says, "Say something." I said, "Okay, voice. If they're still out in the parking lot by the time I'm done with my thing, I'll say something. So I'm taking my time. And the cashier's like, what are you doing? So finally I get my stuff and I head outside and I see them. And they're walking down the sidewalk. They didn't go to the parking lot, but they walked down the sidewalk. And so I start walking behind them. So I'm about maybe 20 feet behind them. And then the guy takes a phone call. And so now he's on the phone and, he's still hot and mad and cussing and all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, oh, can't interrupt him on his phone call. But if he gets off the phone before I get to my car, I'll say something. So I'm like booking to my car, right? And he hangs up the phone. I'm like, ah. So by this time, they've gone into a grocery store. And I have better sense than to walk up behind somebody that I don't know and say, I want to talk to you, right? So I walk around an aisle and I meet them face to face. So it's the three of us kind of engaged. And so I asked the gentleman, I said, sir, can I talk to you for a second? Now, me asking him to talk to him is my stalling technique because the voice that was very active and talking before is giving me nothing. I got nothing, right? So now I'm stalling. So I said, sir, can I talk to you for a second? And he's like, oh, man, whoa. I was like, no, it's all good. I tucked my ears down, put my tail between my legs, showing some submission. And I'm like, no, sir, it's all good. I just want to talk to you. So I asked him to take a couple of steps to the side to give the social cue for the mom and the baby to give us some space, right? So I'm standing in front of him, and guys, we know that we do this. It's just like a millisecond thing that we do with other guys to try to size them up, right? So you'll see a guy, and sometimes people will get a little big. It's just a little second thing, or something in the eyes to try to measure, size people up. So we're playing this little game with each other, and he was like, so what? I said, and then the voice said, open your mouth. And I'm like, all right, I got this now. So I open my mouth, and this is what comes out. Sir, if you want her to grow, you have to water her and give her sunshine. Now, I repeated it, not for him, but for me. I'm like, what are you talking about? In that particular situation, what do I know is the possibility if I said the wrong thing? So he might get upset with me, but more importantly, the scariest thing is that she might catch it when she gets home. So I was praying for wisdom, and this is the kind of stuff that came out of my mouth. And so I looked at him, when I repeated it, I looked at him, I said, sir, do you know what I mean? And he looks at me, and he exhales. And the scales fall off of his muchissimo. And he stands there in front of me, and he says, yes, I do. All right, great, sir. Have a great day. I'm out of here. Right? What did I do for that family? What did I do for that man? I made him think. I opened his eyes to a new approach of dealing with this woman, right? Yes. I did not insult him and make him feel worse. Because what happens when we do that to people? When you insult somebody, right? Or you insult their intelligence, how do they respond? Right? So in the 80s and 90s, the conflict resolution stuff, this is what they taught us. If someone gets escalated, lower your voice. If someone's agitated, you become calm. I tried that with my middle schools. Now, Jimmy, no, we don't act like that in the classroom. Stop talking to me like that! right? I don't know if you've seen that with the babies you work with, right? So I brought him the intensity that he brought to the situation. I wasn't trying, getting him to think differently. And so later, upon reflection, I was glad that it turned out great. I had never been in a situation like that, haven't been in one since. But I at least know what to do or what to say if I ever encounter that. So it's a new tool in my tool bag. But I asked the voice, I said, voice, why did you have me speak to that stuff? And why me? Because there were lots of other people that were also there that could have spoke. And he said, don't be worried about what the other people are supposed to do. Just do what you're supposed to do. And I said, well, so why? And then it came to me why I was supposed to speak to that family. And the reason that I was supposed to speak to that family, and sometimes we even get caught up in not seeing rightly what it is that we're doing. Sometimes we get confused and we think that we are teaching that child, or we're working with that family. When the truth of the matter is, we're helping that family break generations of poverty and ignorance. So I spoke in that light, not because of those two adults that were there, but because that baby needed to see someone be active in their lives to start breaking those chains. I'm here today because my grandfather, they called him boy when he was a grown man. They disrespected him his name was John Wesley, and they would call him George because John was too difficult to say. But because he took those indignities, my father was born, and I was born. And I speak, and I say the things that he never could. And so when we start thinking about our families, we're not just working with this kid. We're helping to break generations of poverty, generations of ignorance. And we're empowering the future every day that we work with them. So don't take your work lightly. And no. So sometimes we don't speak up on certain situations or in certain environments because we feel inadequate. Has anyone ever felt inadequate in speaking up in some of those situations? Please raise your hand. Yeah. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, we'll get to you too. All right. But for those of us who feel inadequate, I want to just relieve some stress off of you, because I want you to know you are inadequate. I love my parents, great parents. They did the best they could with what they had, and everything they gave me would have been inadequate for the challenges I have to face today. They could have never taught me about sexting. Sexting? My parents couldn't have taught me about that. Why? Yeah, they didn't even have cell phones, right? My parents grew up in a time when they had to crank the party line. Yeah, you had other people listening in on the phone line, so you had to be careful what you said on the phone, right? So I want to talk just briefly, and then I want to take a short break. Can we take like a 7-minute break after I finish these points? Would that be okay? Okay, good. All right, so going back to your handout, let's talk about some truths about human beings. So human beings can learn, change, and grow. Who I am today is not who I was at 17. Thank God. Although it is kind of scary to see kids wearing the same hairstyles that we did, a long time. You already know how old I am. Never mind. All right. So people do what they think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work. But why is it that they're doing it, even though it doesn't work? Because it's what they know, it's what they've learned. And I'd like to submit to you that it has been effective in the past. That it was something that they've done because it was beneficial, it was helpful, it was effective in the past. And what we have to help people understand is that sometimes those old behaviors, those old ways of doing things are no longer appropriate for a new context. You know, I know many of us have heard the story of the three generations of women preparing a holiday meal. So there's the granddaughter, the mother, and the grandmother, and the mother and the daughter. The granddaughter and the mother are, you know, working on this turkey. And so the mom is in there just hacking this turkey up and just butchering this poor thing. And the daughter is like, Mom, what are you doing? She's like, I'm cutting the turkey in half. And she said, you know, the daughter says, why? And the mother says, because it does something with the juices and it makes it more tender and all this kind of stuff. And the daughter's like, Mom, that's hooey, because I Googled it. Right? And so the mother gets frustrated and she says, well, go ask your grandmother why I'm cutting the turkey. And so she goes to her grandmother and she says, Grandmother, why is Mom cutting the turkey? She was like, is she still doing that? And she was like, yeah, Grandma. And she said, she told me to ask you why she's cutting the turkey in half. And she said, honey, she's cutting the turkey in half because I used to cut the turkey in half. And so now the young lady is really perplexed. She's like, well, Grandma, why did you cut the turkey in half? And she said, because that's the only way it would fit in the oven. So now we have a second generation repeating what the first generation was doing, but the context has changed, right? And all human behavior is goal-directed. People do things. So even our kids, they do things because they're trying to get something out of it. And it's a goofy question to ask Jeffrey, why did you do that? Because I'm going to tell you exactly why Jeffrey did it. Because if you ask Jeffrey, what's his response going to be? I don't know. Right? So, and then attitude is a reaction to goals. And now it took me a long time to figure out what an attitude is because my parents were old school. They went to old school. I asked them what the address was, but they couldn't tell me the address of the old school that they went to. But okay, good, you got it. All right. So, but attitude is a reaction to a goal. And so what do we know about attitudes is that when people get what they want, they have a positive attitude. When they don't get what they want, they have a negative attitude. And so what is it that determines an attitude? Whether you get your goal or not. Right? So, and then ultimately, what are human goals? People are all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. A woman asked me in a training once, why are all the Somalis moving into my neighborhood? I said, the same reason you moved into your neighborhood. Looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Significance says I'm a person with purpose and power, committed to doing things. Belonging says that I need to be in networks where they recognize what I can do. And safety says that I'm physically, emotionally, and spiritually safe to do those first two things. All right? So let's do this. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish the rest of our session. Thank you so much for what you've done so far.
Thank you so much. You're doing a fabulous job.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I have to go to class, so
Okay, that's fine.
but you've done wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
When you sit in your baby girl's game, I walk off the chair because my grandma was running behind us, and I've never heard any of that since then. Mabel, I know.
Yes, I love. I dance to like.
Oh, really? What's your first name?
I tried that. I had this. My wife first name.
Okay, so that's how my husband and I did, but I got first name.
The next one. All me.
And then my daughter, my oldest daughter, my other middle name is Matia, which is a middle name too. And then if you like M-A-T-A.
I'm thinking girl. Well, and that's
What do you get wrong with this? I think you need too much chocolate.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to. Actually, yeah.
And you're to I'm trying hard not to show it,
Baby.
but baby, you lost that love feeling. Oh, that love feeling. Come on, everybody. You lost that love feeling. Now it's gone. That's it. That's all I got. Although I will say I am a huge Tom Jones fan. I love Tom Jones. He's the closest thing to like Elvis that I can remember. Because when I was a little kid, I didn't remember Elvis, but like Tom Jones is like, you know. And I like one of my favorite songs that Tom Jones did was that song by Prince, "Kiss." You don't have to be beautiful from dusk till dawn. Oh, anyway, so it's really funny. So I don't know if I told you, but my dad was my pastor growing up, and my grandmother was ultra religious. She was a Methodist. Yes. So she did not want us hooked on the devil's music, as she would call the radio, the devil's music. So she bought us AM radios that did not have FM on it. What my grandmother did not know, so I know like a lot of old songs because that's what we used to listen to on the AM radio. But what my grandmother also didn't know was that there was a woman on AM radio named Dr. Ruth. She should have let me listen to the FM radio. So right now I'm going to play a video. Let me do it. So we'll come back to it in just a second. I'll let it load. It's doing some 5 minutes stuff. So if you can open up your handout to the center. And what I'd like to do is have some conversations about barriers to our humanity.
So this idea of historical trauma, we all experience trauma, but I don't know if you can imagine what it would be like to have something stolen from you, have someone else use it, and then they make you ask to borrow your stuff. That would be historical trauma, and specifically historical trauma when we start talking about American Indians, and particularly around things like ricing, right? So there's this big ricing controversy right now, and a number of natives have said, yes, we'll go to jail for doing what we've always done, right? So historical trauma. Institutional racism. We know that the Emancipation Proclamation happened in 1863, freeing the slaves, but people did not necessarily get equal rights until 1964, and not voting rights until 1965. That's 101, 102 years. And what happened in between those two bookends? A lot of stuff. We had the Industrial Revolution. We added 22 states to the Union. We built colleges, universities in states in that period of time. And in that period of time, not everybody had access to all these great advances. And then the idea of poverty, we've talked about a little bit, and then this idea of whiteness. Whiteness is problematic because what it does is it dehumanizes people. You become a color instead of a place that you come from. And some people say, well, I'm American, and that is absolutely true. And we're all Americans, but we also brought some things here that make us unique and make us special, that sometimes just being American doesn't necessarily cover. And so those are all small barriers to our humanity. So what I'd like you to do is you'll see a chart there in gray. Across the top of the chart are categories, and it's not an all-inclusive list of categories, but they're categories of individuals that are broken up in our society. And on the left side of that are people who try to give us information about those folks across the top. And so what I want you to do is to tell me what parents and family, or what did friends, what did school and workplace, what did TV and movies, or what did your personal experience teach you about each of those groups across the top. And so if there was a positive experience, I want you to put a plus if they tried to tell you something positive. If they tried to tell you or give you negative information, I want you to put a minus. If there was never anything you talked about, I want you to put a 0. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus dictates how much you learn. All right? So I'll give about 3 minutes to do that. You may begin now. So pluses, minuses, and zeros. All right, stop right where you are. I know I can give you enough time to finish. The rest you can take home for homework. All right. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you at your table to talk about your pluses, minuses, and zeros. And I'll give you another 3 or 4 minutes to do that. 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. Good job, good job. So I'm curious as to any themes that came up, or epiphanies, or knowledge, or things you thought were interesting as you were sharing about your pluses, minuses, and zeros. Did anything come up for folks? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that is that's a tough place to be, right? When you have family members who aren't supportive of the things that you support, or don't necessarily believe the kinds of things you believe in, and actually are diametrically opposed to what you believe and think about the world. And what is our first inclination when we encounter that kind of resistance? Specifically with our family, but also with other people as well. What do we typically say about that person who tells all the bad jokes at our family gatherings? That we say, hey, that's just Uncle Joe, and then what's the second thing we say about that? It's too late for them, so I write them off. I cut them off. Or we get so self-righteous that we say, you know what, I really don't want our children around Uncle Joe. I mean, It's really bad. How long are your children with Uncle Joe in those family gatherings? 5 minutes? Half hour? So you're saying that a half an hour, 5 minutes, with this one individual can undo every day you spend with your child? You might not be as good of a parent as you think you are. Because it's really interesting to me, because what we say when we encounter those people is that we say we have to cut them off. I cannot be around those people. But if we look at these three words, bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination, what we understand is that bigotry is an emotional state. And how do you change emotion? With another emotion. So when we encounter those bigoted people in our lives and our families, and our inclination is to cut them off, it's the wrong inclination. Because basically what we're saying is that what they think, what they do is more powerful and stronger than what I think and what I do. So I love Facebook and I hate Facebook. I like it because I can make connections with old friends, and I hate it because I can make connections with old friends. So I get this instant message, and they were like, "Andre Koen?" I was like, "Yeah, it's me." They were like, "Fish boy?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that's me." So I got the nickname Fish Boy because when I was in high school, we did everything in the kitchen. The kitchen was the place. My mom was in the kitchen, food was in the kitchen. We even had a TV with the turn knobs in the kitchen, right? So the kitchen was the place. And so I had a ritual of putting out my clothes the day before on the ironing board, which was also in the kitchen. So I could just iron them, eat, boom, I'm out the door, right? But this particular night, it was a Thursday night, and my mom had cooked fish. So I got up like I usually do and just ironed my clothes, jumped in them, went to school, and in first hour algebra class, I had a problem. I smell like fish. Hence, Fish Boy. Now, the interesting thing about that was that I had clothes that were in my closet that did not smell like fish. And why is it that the clothes in the closet did not smell like fish? Because they were in the closet. And because my clothes that were in the kitchen were in close proximity to the fish, they smelled like the fish. So when we talk about this idea of bigotry, we talk about these pluses and these minuses and where we get some of these minuses. I want to ask you a question, and after you chuckle, I want you to think about the ramifications of the question. What do the people who hang around you smell like? Does the goodness of your life exude so much that those people also become good smelling as well? That's it, after the chuckle. So when we talk about this idea of bigotry, how do you change a bigot? One of the things we have to start recognizing is that if we cut those people off, do they get better? No. They don't get better. As a matter of fact, they get worse, and they start breeding. It's horrible. Unchecked, they just start breeding. So what do we have to do? We have to tether ourselves to those individuals. We have to tether ourselves to bigots. Now, the tether can be very long, but we're still connected. Uncle Joe will keep telling these bad jokes, but I'm not going to let you go. Because there's something that, now, I don't know if you have friends like this, but I have friends who know where I stand on certain situations, on certain things, and they keep coming to me to talk about it. Why do they keep coming to me? They already know how I stand on it. Why do they keep coming to me? Because they are asking me to help them change their minds. There's something about me that they see, and they're like, okay, he says this, he thinks this, and I don't. But maybe this is the time that he'll help me change my mind or change my behavior. Right? When we talk about this idea of prejudice, I don't know if you saw that in your pluses, minuses, and zeros, where there's some places that you were either given prejudice or you have prejudices based on those things that you were taught. I know that TV, movies, and media is a huge place for this idea of prejudice to be born, right? Love Johnny Depp, and I love Johnny Depp, but I'm glad Lone Ranger was a flop. Do we need another movie where a white man plays an Indian when there are plenty of Native Americans or American Indians that can play the role themselves? Prejudice. And prejudice is a frozen way of thinking. It's a frozen way of thinking. And how do you change how someone thinks? So there was many of you are old enough to remember this show. It was called Perry Mason. And Perry Mason was this attorney. He was just really good at what he did. And so he'd come into the courtroom, he'd already done his investigations and whatnot, and he'd come in and he'd ask like 3 questions. And one of the questions he knew that the opposing side was going to throw out. They were going to say, "We object to that question. You can't answer it." And Perry would say, "I withdraw that question." Now, Perry was really smart, and he knew that the other side was going to throw out the question. They were going to pose that question. But why would Perry, in his wisdom, ask the question in the first place? To give the people something to think about. How do you help people who have a prejudiced mindset? You give them something to think about. Dad, is there another news station that says something different? Where did you hear that about that group of people? Is there an article that I can read that says exactly what you're just talking about? How do you know that to be true about everyone? Do HR companies tell people when they've been reverse discriminated against? What are the statistics on that? You start asking a prejudiced person questions about what they think, what starts to happen? They get defensive, and then they get to a point where they're like, "Just stop talking to me. I don't know." Oh, so maybe you are living in a false reality, right? The last thing that we need to recognize is that discrimination is a behavior, and it's illegal behavior, right? I'm going to say this and take it in the spirit in which it's given, but people are allowed to be bigots. And people are allowed to be prejudiced. It is their right to do so. But people cannot discriminate. That is illegal. And so one of the things that we know about bigotry is that it is not a cognitive process. It is an emotional process. And so to help a bigot, you have to love them. Just like you would with a sad friend. You don't take charts and graphs to a sad friend and say, "Here are all the reasons you should not be sad." Right? That's not what you do. Right? And the last thing that I'd like to leave with you is that you have to have a good awareness of who you are. Because there will be challenges to who you are. So on the right-hand corner of your handout, there are 4 squares. And I want you to answer these 4 questions. Because the most valuable commodity on the planet is at stake if we don't know how to answer these 4 questions. So the first question is, what is your race or ethnicity? What is your race or ethnicity? So please write that in that first square. Whatever you consider to be first square. Second square. What do you like about being your race or ethnicity? What do you like about it? Third square. What embarrasses you about being your race or ethnicity? Fourth square. What do you want people to know that they may not know about your race or ethnicity? What would you like for people to know that they may not know about your race or your ethnicity? Right? Stop right there. I don't need to know what your answers are. Those answers are for you. But I am curious as you were writing down those questions, what were some of your answers to those questions? What things were coming up for you as you were writing those things down? So her question was around question number one, how do you even classify it? Because I'm such a mix of all sorts of things. So how do I even answer that? All right. Other folks? People think we're all the same because of our skin color. Who is us and we? Because people don't think I'm the same. Who is us and we?
Oh, just like in general, like,
Okay. So you're talking about white people and other groups, right? So they think that everybody in each one of those groups is the same. Okay. Yes. Right. So if you're in a group with similar skin color, they assume that you think the same kinds of things. Okay. So of the four questions, what other things came up from folks out of those four questions? Yes. You felt guilty. About what? So she says she feels guilty, a little bit guilty, because of the race she was born in. Did you do that? Did you choose the race you were born in? No. Right? So one of the things that's problematic, that becomes an obstacle illusion. What would you say if you had a teenager in front of you, and the teenager could only say bad things about themselves, and they could never say anything good about themselves? What would be your diagnosis of that teenager? That someone taught them that. But what would you say to? How do we label someone who can't say anything good about themselves, but can only say bad things about themselves? They have low self-esteem. Now, I don't know about you because I didn't ask you, your questions, but I know that when I've done other groups and we have explored what the answers are to those questions, that one of the things that comes up is that when I ask the question, what do you like about being your race? There are lots of people who don't have an answer for that. And then when you ask the counter question, what is embarrassing about being your race? They have a whole litany of things that they can say that is embarrassing. And so I might suggest that the people who can't say anything good about themselves or feel bad about saying good things about themselves suffer from low self-esteem. Which means that if I see someone else with high self-esteem, how do I treat that person? What might I think about that person? Might I be jealous? Might I think that they're arrogant? Might I say, well, how come you can do it, but I can't? Obstacle illusion. to our authentic human relationships, right? Now, I'm going to say something that's very tricky and it's very nuanced, so I want you to pick up the nuance of this. One of the things that I want for my white brothers and sisters that are in here is I want you to be proud to be white. I'm not saying get an outfit and get the little, the little cone hat. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is know enough about who you are and where you come from. Because the children that you work with will be drawing upon your energy of knowing who you are. Because they need to be just as proud. The other thing that I want, particularly for my white brothers and sisters to do, is I want you to be as upset at injustice that happens to the children that you work with as if you would they were your own children. I want you to get mad. In Minneapolis metro area, the high school dropout rate is almost at 55% of students who go into high school. That's unacceptable for anybody. Can you imagine, Cambria having 55% of its products be defective? Can you imagine Target, coming out with profits that are 55% in the negative? There's no way that would go on. But we allow those kinds of things to happen in our school systems because we don't know what to do. And so what should we do? We should help save the human soul. The most valuable commodity on the planet is the human soul. People build kingdoms trying to grab the human soul. People create opportunities for people to give up their human soul. And so one of the things that I need you to do is I need for you to be full, I need for you to be proud of who you are so that you can teach our children how to be proud of who they are. Because when you do that, the product that you get is me. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. We're just about out of time. Any questions, comments, observations? All right, great. Thank you so much. It's been great being with you. Have a good day.
So we are at 12 noon, and I believe the agenda says lunch. So please be respectful of the time back. We do have another guest speaker right away at 1. So you are free to go to lunch and be back at 1. Thank you.